Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are located in Decatur, Georgia, but we are coming to you live from our respective homes around the country, at least. And we hope that wherever you're watching from tonight, you'll shout out in the chat and let us know. We love to know where you're watching from. We love to be connected to our international feminist community. So please don't be shy in the chat. We want you to feel at home. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Lola, which is the women's co-working community here in Atlanta. That link is also in the chat, so check out thelola.com. It's a great place to generate ideas, be in community with other feminists, and use this time of pandemic to birth new things. It's a great place to be creative, and we hope if you're working on a novel or any other kind of project that the Lola might be a great resource for you. So thank you to the Lola for helping us bring more creativity to our community. We are here tonight first with Megha Majumdar, who is a senior editor at Catapult and the author of the National Book Award long-listed and New York Times notable novel, A Burning. She is coming to us from New York City. And she is here to be in conversation with Randa Jarrar. Randa is the author of the novel A Map of Home, which is one of my personal favorites and how I came to know Randa's work, and the collection of Him, Me, Muhammad Ali, her work, a collection of stories. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Salon, Bitch, BuzzFeed, and elsewhere. She is a recipient of a Creative Capital Award and an American Book Award, as well as awards and fellowships from the Civitella Ranieri Foundation, the Lannan Foundation, Hedgebrook, Penn, and others. A professor of creative writing and a performer, Jarrar lives in Los Angeles. And the book we are here tonight is a beautiful book. In some ways, it's a departure from the first two books because it is memoir, but in some ways it's not. In some ways, there's a through line between all three books. So we're here to celebrate Love is in ExCountry. I hope folks will settle in and enjoy what I know is just going to be a fabulous night. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear this conversation.
Thank you, ER.
Thank you so much, ER. Hi. I'm so excited to do this. I've been waiting for this. Hi everyone who's watching. I am so thrilled to chat with Randa Jarrar about her beautiful, powerful, joyous memoir, Love is in ExCountry. If you haven't read it yet, Carmen Maria Machado calls it a perfect, unforgettable howl of a book. Maybe we can start by, Randa, do you want to give everyone a little intro to the book and then perhaps read a little bit?
Yes. So this book, a lot of the sort of beginning of, the nugget of this book is, I spent some time in 2015 in West Texas at a residency, and I had just read, books like Citizen and The Argonauts and other amazing nonfiction by poets. And I thought, I kind of want to, can I do something like this? I want to write a memoir. I want to write, a collection of nonfiction that's like slim but powerful. And I want to have these sentences that I'm proud of. And I want it to be about my body and about bodies. And I want to look at, all of these different types of violences, erasures, but also visibilize myself and others like me and celebrate us, in a book. So that's where the idea for the book came from. And I would love to read a little. I'm just going to get up and grab my copy. Yay! And I can just kind of read a little from the opening. In the summer of 2016, my son, now an adult and a sabbatical ahead of me, I decided to drive across the country alone. I had read about the Egyptian dancer and actress Tahia Carioca doing a cross-country American trip once in Edward Said's Reflections on Exile. He interviewed Carioca, and she told him she'd been married at least a dozen times. When he asked her what she thought of America, she had said, "Like the people, hate their government's policies." She was born in Egypt in 1919. I was conceived in Egypt almost 60 years later, and here I was, an American woman who had never crossed her own country by car. But the deeper I dug into Tahia Carioca's trip, the less I found about it. She had indeed married more than a dozen times. I found the names of 14 of her husbands. One of them was an American lieutenant she had met while she was dancing at the Cairo Officers Club during the Second World War. I whistled the loudest, he boasted to Associated Press reporters after they married. She was 25 or 26, a young woman who had already been dancing for 10 years. She loved to dance, she always said, but hated the stereotypes about dancers. Of these, she told an American newspaper in 1946, was the idea that dancers lead a life of exotic leisure. In the movies, she said, the dancers drink big goblets of wine, eat at rich banquets, and flirt with everybody. Actually, I lead a rather simple life to keep my weight down and my muscles light. I found photos of her 50 years after this interview. In them, she is fuller, big-bellied, with fat arms and a gorgeous round face. By then, she was finally leading the rich life she had so fully earned.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Randa.
Thank you, Megha.
I'm so glad that you read from the beginning because it sets up the road trip, which is kind of the structural spine of your memoir. But it does something super interesting and super subversive, which has been just so appealing to me since I read the earliest pages. And I want to talk about the inspiration for the subversive work that you're doing here. You know, yes, we go to all of these different American places with you, but we also hop away. We go to a book festival in Tunisia, and there's something about you, the writer, claiming the freedom of this classic American experience, a road trip, as a person whose right to belong in this country is questioned. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So I really love, books that skip around in time and in place. And I feel often that my memory does that too. I grew up in so many different places, and I've moved more than 25 times as an adult, and so has my son, right? So many of my memories, I'll think of a memory that's really vivid, but I'll think it's in like this one city, when in reality it was in this other city. Or, I'll sometimes get the time right, but I won't get the place right. So that kind of like Palestinian, but also daughter of immigrants kind of confusion, to me, like, matches up really well with nonfiction, because I find that the freedom that you can have skipping around in time on paper, right, on the page, is so much, it's even more freeing, I think, to just be able to say, well, I'm in a car now, right, in this scene, but maybe I'm thinking about Beirut, and maybe when I'm in Beirut, I'm thinking about being in this car, and so on. So there's a kind of like constant sort of like disorientation that I've embraced, and I wanted the book to have that too. And I wanted readers to experience that disorientation, or a sort of familiarity with that disorientation, in case, because I'm hoping a lot of people read it who can relate to that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You were speaking about, wanting to write beautiful poetic sentences when you first were thinking whether you could write such a book. And That's so funny that you say that, because there are so many lines in this book that I think I mentioned to you in the first kind of long editorial email, and those lines have just stayed with me for what has it been, two years now, I think. And so I wanted to talk about one of them. There's this line in the book about how being Arab American means feeling like a mouse dunked into a pot of invisible ink. And that erasure is something that this book pushes back against so beautifully. Can you talk about that part of this book's project?
Yes, I love that. I really wanted to like think about magic and have, a couple of different chapters in the book about magic, the magic of being a child, the magic of, invisibility, the kind of yearning for magical powers, which really is just rooted in wanting power in general to be able to live the life that I wanted to lead. And so, yeah, I always remembered these kinds of moments of being a child and seeing cartoons where mice were, I'm thinking about Tom and Jerry here specifically. So Jerry dunking himself into like invisibility, like a little pot of invisibility ink so that he could get away from Tom, and I like jokingly say Tom and Jerry is actually just about Israel and Palestine, but whatever. But yeah, so I mean, I think that I definitely wanted to talk about that and address that. And I wanted to connect it to sexuality, and to the ways that, being penetrated or penetrating someone also goes into that sort of that realm of invisibility, or the realm of magic when it comes to sensuality and intimate touch. And all of these things to me like blend together. There's no way to separate like, oh, this is identity, this is sexuality, this is history, it's all just part of the same struggle and also like pain, but also pleasure. So but yeah, that's why I was really into using images like that one to bring it more.
And since you touch on sexuality, let's talk about sex in this book. It's such a, sex in this book is such a place of freedom and joy. One of the chapters that we added, I remember having this conversation on the phone with you actually when you were thinking about writing this chapter, I think. And one of the chapters that we added is about sex and kink, and the reflections there are so moving. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I had initially, put in sort of like my early experiences with kink. And I had published that in, or the chapter it's in, the Pharaoh, the slave versus Pharaoh chapter. I felt like started touching on like what kink means, especially to a woman, especially to people who haven't really felt an ownership of their own bodies and sexualities. But then I just was like, oh, I'll just do some research, and I live in LA, and sadly there's a pandemic now. But before the pandemic, it was really great to be able to like visit dungeons and to get to know people who were running these dungeons and who were performing at the dungeons. And so I just started taking notes and like literally like coming home from meetups and noting, the things that I'd seen and talking to DOMs and asking them if I could write about them. And that's where the Taking the Knife essay comes in chapter. It was really, really great to push myself to explore that more, because I think what I ended up getting at was a more sort of, especially towards the end of the book, a more complete sense of healing those wounds that I think I was still struggling with, not just as a person, but as a character, right? Like as the subject of the memoir. So, yeah, it was really fun to write about. And I've often, you know, been in rooms where, like, especially when I was younger and I was in grad school or whatever, where people were really shy to talk about sexuality. I remember once as an undergrad, I handed in a story that wasn't quite erotica, but was very sexually explicit. And I didn't really get a lot of feedback because everybody was blushing, you know. So it was sort of like, well, I want to make this better. So I think it's hard. It's difficult to get that kind of feedback. So I was really grateful to know that you were, you know, not just cool with me expanding that, but you saw the ways that it could make the book better.
Yeah, I was so moved by how, you know, you write in that chapter about how in these spaces there is such clear communication, there is such clear consent. You know, there can be a woman who is clearly able to say, you can touch me, and that is such a powerful thing for so many of us. And this kind of leads into the book's larger interest, like you were saying when you were introducing the book's larger interest in bodies. And I think, you know, many other readers have picked up on it. In Shondaland, Sarah Nielsen wrote about how it's a profound meditation on race, borders, abuse, and above all, bodies. Everything is seen, felt, experienced through the lens of the body, and the reader will feel it in theirs too. And I have been so struck while working with you on this book by how the body is something that is so shamed and so punished here, and yet it carries forward a certain triumph. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, that time in 2015 where I, you know, I really sat down and said, I do want to write this book. The focus was going to be the body always. So I wanted to, so I like started out by making all these lists, you know, like the body in water, the body on an airplane, the body in bed, the body during sex, the body during different types of sex, the body in a bathtub, the body getting clean, the body getting dirty, the body flying, the body being buried, the body dancing, the body sitting still. And like, so those were all just lists I was making and sitting down like every morning and afternoon and like trying to write out descriptions of, you know, memories of my body doing all of those things, because I just wanted the book to be like the way that Sarah Nielsen sees it, like in that quote, I wanted this book to be like super connected to my body. And I wanted my body, obviously when you write, you're using your body to write, but I really wanted to inhabit my body while I was writing it and to not skip over or kind of dissociate. Because I feel like as thinkers and writers, we're often like encouraged to, you know, separate ourselves, right? Thinkers, let's just use our minds and be separated from our bodies. But I feel as someone who went through trauma and abuse, that restoration between mind and body has been really important. And writing the book, I think, helped me complete that restoration. And it's just been so important to me to honor my body since it has been through so much, and to thank it for carrying me through that and getting me where I am now, you know?
Yeah. I have a question about that, but I do want to remind everybody watching that you can put your question in the Ask a Question box, which is at the bottom of the screen, and we will have time soon to turn to your questions. So please do put them in the box throughout the conversation. So you touch on how, this book is so much about surviving trauma. It's about surviving domestic abuse, sexual assault. There is so much pain in the book. But, there is so much humor and comedy and joy. And you've spoken about how important those things are to you. And it's absolutely evident in the book. I'm so curious about how you wrote that balance.
I think that I like to think of myself as as a comic writer and as someone who writes comedy into her books. And I really love kind of playing with that line between sadness and grief and joy, and I think as the eldest person, the eldest sister, right, in a family, so much of my role was caregiving, but also to lend some levity to situations by being funny. So, doing accents and doing my parents' accents and mimicking them, doing accents of the British people.
That's terrible.
Teachers in my school, the British teachers in my school, especially my parents, loved hearing fake British accents from me. Just just within the family, the entertainment that we did, that I enjoyed providing. It's almost like I can't help myself. So, there's a small bit in the book, about Juna Barnes, and the doll that her girlfriend gave her once. And she ended up writing about it in Nightwood. And it's a chapter about dolls, and it's a pretty serious chapter, but I just couldn't help but put in this factoid that I learned, which is that Juna Barnes met James Joyce once, but the entire time she was hanging out with him, she kind of spaced out. So she didn't really get to know what James Joyce was like or ask him any questions, because she was just kind of stoned and a little spaced out. And I love that. I love that there, historically we hear all these stories, right? But we don't realize that people were laughing. People were also making fun of each other, spacing out, right? I don't know, that the history has also been full of joy, and maybe people have dealt with pain through laughter. So it's kind of like seeing these old black and white photos colorized, right? You're like, oh, we were always human, right? I love that.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about history has always held joy, and perhaps we fail to see it in the historical record, but it has always been there. And I feel like that is making me think about your book as just a particularly important entry into that record. It's such a complex, beautiful book, which doesn't shy away from anything, but it also orients us toward joy. That's definitely how I felt reading it. Here's a lighter question for you. What have been places of joy for you lately?
I've been really enjoying the fact that we don't have pressure now to hang out with people. Sometimes it can be very lonely, right? And I understand, and I feel bad for people who are lonely, but I've just really found joy in just being a slob and hanging out at home and resting and just constantly making myself frozen pizzas and smoking weed and hanging out with my dog and watching amazing but also terrible television like Bridgerton. And
I watched Bridgerton too.
Oh my God, it was so entertaining.
So bad and so good.
So bad, but it's so good. It is so good, right? Just things like this, and also honestly, the fact that we're living through history And we have Twitter. Like, we're so lucky. And TikTok, I mean, it's like everyone has a TV station now. So we can be endlessly entertained, right? And entertain each other. Like, I love that that's happening right now. We're all just sort of like pinging each other, like, hey, this, like, look, like, let's start a conversation, but let's do it with this particular song or in this particular move, like with the silhouette challenge, just whatever it is. Like, human beings are still able to kind of inspire each other and make each other laugh. It's like, it's just stunning to me. I'm so glad.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the topic that I think we have to talk about in an author-editor chat, which is what was the editorial process like for you?
It was amazing. Okay, so for everyone watching, yeah, I had never worked, first of all, I had never worked with an editor that I felt really understood what I was doing and didn't want to change the shape of what I was doing, right? Like, in the past, I've had editors say, oh, well, let's make this a little more arty. Let's make this a little more accessible. Maybe tone down the sexuality, maybe tone down. But with you, I just felt like you just wanted to honor what it was. And that letter that you sent me, I was at AWP, and AWP is just like, it can be such a torturous place to be as a writer because you're like one of 15,000 or something. And just like getting that email from you during that time made me feel so seen. And it was such a sensitive, kind letter, you know, saying, you know, there is work to do, but then you actually had suggestions for how to do it. And it was so helpful. It was just so helpful to work with another writer and to work with an editor who was a woman of color and who understood what this book was trying to do and what it wasn't trying to do. So for me, it was magic from beginning to end. It was just like a dream come true. So.
Oh my God, Randa. That was not an invitation for compliments, but I'm so glad that
it's true. It was a really gentle, and it went really well. I felt like everything from your suggestions to the edits to, you know, the phone calls we had were just, you know, so helpful. Because, you know, I feel like with books like this, it can be difficult to go back over painful memories. And I just kept remembering, you know, maybe this just isn't just for me. Like, I need to just keep going because maybe someone reading this needs to know that this is actually abuse, or maybe someone reading this needs to see a reflection of their own experiences. But yeah. So that was.
I'm so moved. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you what it's like for you to go, like, to like kind of like switch hats like that as a novelist and an editor. Like, what techniques do you use, or is it just like you're just going bonkers in your house trying to make it happen?
You know, I think I get so much energy from working with authors like you know, especially authors who bring so much kindness and energy to the process, you know, authors with whom I can have just the space of complete trust where we understand that, you know, we're on this team, we're trying to fulfill your vision for this book. And that space of watching how you address certain suggestions, you know, if we're talking about structure, how you go about it, you know, how you polish your sentences. I think that is a space of so much just vitality and learning for me. So I feel really grateful for that, you know, and I guess when I put on my writer hat, I probably try to be as harsh with my own pages as I would be with my author's work, because, you know, the ultimate thing, like you said, is to honor the work, is to ask, is it the truest expression of itself? And, you know, those questions kind of remain the same across all of the work that I do. But I really loved working on this book. And, you know, you're right that something that I was very conscious of is that there is so much that is intimate, deeply personal in this book. And I was very aware that this is not material. You know, this is life, and you are drawing from it, you are crafting it into something artful. But the source of it is your life. And, you know, how do I honor that in this process, you know? Yeah, so I'm glad that it was a good process for you.
It really was. And like, I love that we had also worked earlier, you know, on a piece of fiction of mine that was satirical. And it took me, I think, 8 months from when you gave me edits to like be able to get it to where I thought that it was enough of a change, but also that it was working. So I feel like I've been lucky to kind of get your wisdom both as a fiction writer and an essayist. So that was really cool. Just gonna throw that out there.
It's been my joy, Randa. So I think we are starting to get questions in the box. Let me just look at it. Okay. There's a question from Lane who asks, you mentioned the divide between you as a character and you as a writer and person. How do you navigate that dynamic?
I think that when you're kind of creating art out of your life, like you're saying, there needs to be enough of a distance, especially for me, between like myself and what I'm writing about. Even if I'm writing about myself, I like kind of being able to step back and write about those experiences, versus me as a person, or me as the current day. I mean, if I wrote about today, like today, I just kind of like hung out with my friends in the park, and you know, because we were celebrating. My friend Yasmin has this great installation that she just put up at the University of Michigan that's just all Arab women dancing and hanging out. And it's to me, I would need to kind of like write that down in my journal or in my notes, and then maybe in a couple of months craft that into something bigger. So maybe the separation is really time, which is fake. But like we can just stop here, because I'll just keep spinning out.
You know, speaking of time, I want to touch on a line in your book which has stayed with me for a very long time. This is so much a book about being a daughter, being a mother, and the line which comes pretty late in the book, it goes, sometimes in my escape from being a mother, I become a daughter fully. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think that like I said earlier, because I was the eldest, I think that I didn't really get to enjoy being a daughter as much as I felt like I was being an older sister, or sort of like a second mother to everyone in my household. So I think that in that section of the book, I'm allowing myself to be younger, to be my parents' child. And I used it also to set up the very ending of the book, which, you know, I don't want to give away because some people haven't read it yet. So it's a way kind of to prepare the reader for the scene to come. Yeah, so I'm always kind of thinking like, okay, what have we had so far? What is the reader expecting next? And where am I as a character in time? and how can I really like show the redemption or the arc that I went through. And I think that because I was a mother when I was so young, right, and forced to mother others before that, I didn't really get to embrace my daughterness, right? Have others care for me, basically. But yeah.
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 Yeah. And the end of the book, we will not give it away, but it is so beautiful, and it just leaves me wanting to stay with it every time I read it. Yeah, it's just a masterful way to close this story, which I love. We have more questions. I think we can perhaps put two of these together from Leah and Anna. So Leah says, Randa, I could not put your book down. Brava, congratulations on such an achievement. One of the things I love is how non-linear it was. Did you set out to write it like that? How do you approach time in your work? So that's one question. And I think we can club it together with the one from Anna, who says, hi, Anna, thank you for coming. I loved how the physical road trip across the continent was also a journey across a map of memories that animate the trials and triumphs you've experienced. Did the book always carry this form, one trip on top of and supporting the other, or was its form initially different? That's a great question.
That's great. I think initially, the road trip part was not quite as, like, now it's more of a spine, like more of a bridge, whereas in the past it was all kind of staccato a little bit more. So I think with Megha's help and guidance, I was able to figure out how to kind of, I mean, to be, I think, less shy about stepping away from it completely too. And just, you know, have us be kind of maybe in El Paso, but at the same time be, you know, in Kuwait or in Palestine. So, yeah, I think initially it was more disparate, and then as the drafts built, there became more connections through time and memory, etc. Yeah, and I think that I love that it's several trips like on top of each other that way. It's just so multi-layered, and it just, I think the way I approach time can be, I love not being linear, and I love trying to replicate the way that our memories work, right? And the fact that our memories are just our minds taking snapshots of moments, like, that's wild to me. They're not really real, or, right? They're not quite shareable. Nobody has the same ones. So I love that you can be in a moment thinking about another moment. And as someone who has PTSD and has been traumatized, when you are in a moment and it reminds you of a traumatic moment, I've done so much work in therapy, et cetera, to remember that I'm actually in this moment and no longer struggling in this moment. But I also have done the work of honoring this other moment, right? But not so much that I'm not honoring the present moment. And maybe this other moment where I was having joy, and maybe this other moment, right? So just allowing all of these realities and all of these histories to coexist with each other, and then try to create art out of that, I think was definitely, like, that was the goal. That's what I wanted to do, but I was never sure if I was spending enough time in each given spot. Yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up craft question about writing traumatic memories?
Yes.
What is your advice for other people who are writing about trauma?
It's a really good question. And it is connected, yeah, to what I was just saying, because you need to kind of remember, right, what the trauma was, what the wound was, which means you have to kind of look at the wound in order to write about the wound. But how can you look at the wound and write about the wound if you're literally triggered or if you're having a hard time? And so for me, honestly, it just took me a very long time. So especially the What Love Is chapter, and the chapter right before that, with my father's abuse, those two chapters honestly took me 8 years to write. It just took me such a long time to be able to, put down one description and then step away and take care of myself and then come back. So just take your time if you're a survivor or a victim, or you want to record what happened and you want to talk about what happened. I would say, just be super, super gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Remember that you can look at the wound, record the wound, be triggered by the wound, and take your time to kind of come back in to record it. And also there's different layers. You can, in first drafts, what you're doing is just recording. It doesn't have to be a perfect sentence. It doesn't have to have metaphors. It doesn't have to have, however you want to put it down first. And then you can sort of step away or think of, ways to revise those sentences. And sometimes it actually comes out in a metaphor because you don't want to get so super close to the wound. And so you can allow that to happen too. And just kind of observe and don't judge yourself and be kind to yourself.
Yeah. That is so powerful. And I think it leads us to a question that Nada is asking. I love how you talked about how the writing process was healing in the way it helped restore connection between your body and mind. As a Palestinian myself, who has very little opportunities to interact with other Palestinian writers, I've always felt that our relationship to our bodies is connected to / reflective of our relationship to the land we lost. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I agree. It really is. And I feel like, as a little girl, my parents would enroll me in like these amazing camps they were like after school kinds of activities that were run by the PLO in Kuwait. And they were just basically like, ways to think about how to reconnect with that land, whether through songs, or debki, dancing, embroidery, all of these kind of ways to try to reconnect with the land. But I think that the thing that was missing was the reckoning that with that disconnection and the deep grief that engenders, and honoring that and just saying, yes, we are completely disconnected. And one thing I've learned and that I've loved hearing from Black activists is the privilege that we have too, as Palestinians, to know where we are exiled from. Like, we at least know where we're from. Right? We might not have that connection anymore, but we know that. And what we do with that knowledge, I think, by commemorating it and loving it and making Palestine be around us everywhere we go, I think that's hugely key. There's chapters in the book too where I talk about this original wound or loss, and the ways that I've coped in healthy and unhealthy ways. The theft chapter, for example. So that's for you to read and the ways that you've also dealt with or healed through that grief.
Here's a question from, I think this is from ER, who is our wonderful host who worked really hard to put this event together. So thank you, ER. The question is, were there things that you decided to cut from the book that were particularly difficult to edit out?
I think there were a couple of things. So there was a chapter on maternal grief that I took out because I felt like it just wasn't fitting in the book. It was, it's over at LitHub now, you can read it. But I think that there were more sort of descriptions of a particular sexual assault that I ended up cutting. And yeah, just like descriptions of the person who did that, like realizing that there are legal consequences to things. So that, I think that was a little difficult too, but mostly I think everything, I mean, I'm happy with everything that's in there. I don't feel like I took out a lot. But to getting to the point where before, to submit it to editors, and when Megha first saw it, that was a pared down version too, because there had been more trips, there had been more experiences that I just didn't feel like were the strongest, and I didn't want them kind of to dilute the effect of the book. So yeah.
And while we're talking about edits and craft, this question is solely for me because I want to learn from you. Can you talk about a craft question which is animating you right now, which is on your mind, something craft related that you've been mulling over?
I'd love that. I've been working on screenplays since just like this past year. I've been like really into the screenplay. But one of the things I don't like is what I love about fiction specifically, and nonfiction has this too, but it's the narrator. I love this, like the fiction narrator voice. But I guess maybe if I was wondering about something specific, it would be the separation of the author from the narrator, from the speaker, maybe, and like figuring out more of how I can work with third person, because I love the first person so much. But third person has been like just a hugely painful thing to try out, and I've done it. I mean, I've used it. I've written stories in the third person, but I think writing scripts has really forced me to like think more in terms of a third person narrator and what that could look like, in a third person narrator who is, not the sort of expected sort of like white bearded god character, right? Or like Edith Wharton, maybe, like, right? Or we just talked about Bridgerton, so the voice of Julie Christie, or no, it was not. Is it Julie Christie, or is it Julie Andrews as the gossip auntie or whatever, right? So
wait, is that who that is? I did not know that.
Yes.
Very cool.
I didn't give anything away, just her voice. Yeah, maybe the craft, like wondering about third person and figuring out a way to slay it, really.
I did not anticipate that this event would include avoiding Bridgerton spoilers. Love it. So this is your first book of nonfiction.
Yes.
You have written so much fiction before, and I'm curious about what lessons from writing fiction did you feel carry over into the writing of memoir?
So many. I feel like, you know, now that I'm starting to teach nonfiction a little bit, just the importance of writing in scenes, you know, like so many nonfiction writers, I don't think have that kind of training, especially in the beginning. And it's the kind of training that fiction writers can take for granted, just that you're not just describing thoughts and ideas, but you're actually moving people around inside a physical space, and the kind of confidence that you need to have to do that. I think that's what carried over, just my confidence in my ability to do that, to have, you know, different people be speaking at once or having thoughts at once, or, you know, moving through time, moving through space in a car or on an airplane, switching points of view, just all of that, and like and settings, just knowing all of these things that you learn by writing fiction and then coming to nonfiction. I think it's easier to do that than to start with nonfiction and then try to go to fiction. I think David Foster Wallace, I remember him saying that too, that like it was so much easier for him to write nonfiction, easier than fiction, right?
Okay, we have a question from Sheely. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. If we saw countries as lovers, which one would be the love of your life? And how do you see or relate yourself with that country now?
Oh, wow, I love it. It's such a good question, and it's so hard, because part of me wants to say that Palestine is the love of my life. But sadly, I haven't gotten to really know Palestine that well, to fall deeply in love with it, which is heartbreaking, you know? So I think Palestine, the hope is that it will be the love of my life. But honestly, the love of my life as a country is Egypt. Egypt is just so old and hilarious, and and just like, there's everything there, the Mediterranean, you know, the Red Sea, deserts, mountains, valleys, just the people are amazing. The kinds of scams they run, the kinds of humor they have, just their ingenuity, the fact that like Egyptians have lived in the same places, right? Like along the Nile for centuries. And they've also died there. The kind of stacking, like there's bodies, there's people, there's all of this history, and it's not going anywhere. I love that. So I went like a year ago with friends, and I'd never really just gone with friends before. I'd always gone with family. And my love for Egypt just really cemented that during that trip. And I have dreams about it, like romantic dreams about just walking by the Mediterranean, like at least once a week. So yeah, I can see myself being an old lady there, you know, at least 6 months out of the year.
I'll come visit you in Egypt. That makes me really want to go, especially what you say about it being like funny and people running hilarious scams.
Oh my God, incredible scams, incredible, the sense of humor, the joy, just the fact that people have so little. Most people there have so little, but are still so hilarious. It's incredible to me. And the music, and, you know, of course, like the food is not as good as like Lebanon or Palestine or Syria, but even the food is funny, you know, like there's just the resourcefulness, the tuk-tuks that people are driving around. I don't know. I really want to visit India, so I want to visit you if you're ever there for an extended time.
Yes, we'll do that. Future
really
plan.
Yeah.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so maybe we can wrap up with one question, which is, what does your writing process look like these days? Can you give us a sense for what you're working on? And I realize this is rolling all of my final questions into one, but if you want to throw in a reading recommendation, I would love that.
Yay, yeah. My writing process, I definitely feel very, very comfortable, like sitting down and writing for extended amounts of time when I feel like I have an idea or something to work towards. And when I don't, I feel very comfortable not writing and like sitting back and chilling a little bit. So it's been really nice and I've been leading up to this, I think, the last 3 or 4 years. Like I do tend to produce a lot, but I also really enjoy revising. So it just comes in cycles. Like there'll be 2 days a week where I just revise, and then 2 or 3 days a week where I'm producing. And I really enjoy that. Plus I like to split up my day, so that my mornings might be for revisions and my evenings might be for generative stuff. So yeah, that's the process so far. In terms of reading, I assigned the Craft in the Real World book that Matt Celestes wrote.
Oh, amazing.
To all my grad students. It's so good. It's so good. I also just had never read Melissa Broder, and I just read The Pisces, and it was so funny and amazing. Just there's a scene in The Pisces where she's having sex with some dude in a public bathroom, and Tears in Heaven comes on, that Eric Clapton. I thought, oh my God, this is such a good description for bad public sex, like it's just it was just so well done. But yeah, Craft in the Real World, I see that there's a link for it right there.
Yeah, amazing. I have to read the Melissa Broder. I think she has a new book out too.
She does have a new book out. I'm not as excited about that one because I find that characters, it's really difficult to capture fat characters, I think. And I don't know if there's enough love for the fat character, but I haven't read the book yet. So I'll probably borrow it from someone.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Randa, and everybody watching. Buy Love is an ExCountry. It's a gorgeous book. Thank you so much for joining us. And here's ER. Thank you, ER.
Thank you, Megha. Thank you guys so much for being here. I love it.
This was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to you both. Thank you to everyone watching at home. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Yes, please click on this teal button at the bottom of your screen to buy Love is an ExCountry. You can also buy Megha's book via that link, so please go ahead and do that. It is also my job and my honor to remind folks that we are a nonprofit, and so we are primarily supported by individual donors. $1, $5, $10, any of that really helps us in our work. We also know that people's money is all over the place right now, so we're just glad you're here, and our events will always be free. But we are really, really grateful to anything that you are able to do. I want to let you know that I'll be adding captions to this broadcast and putting it up on our YouTube channel. So if you know folks who would benefit from being able to watch this with captions, please let them know. It'll be up probably within 24 to 48 hours. And our YouTube channel is just /Kara Circle. So go check us out there. We got a ton of great events up from the last year of the pandemic. One of the nice things about the pandemic, probably the only nice thing about the pandemic, is we have this wonderful backlog of events. So if you're feeling lonely and you want to be in great literary company, go hang out on our YouTube channel with brilliant folks talking about books. Again, thank you so much, Randa. It's always, we just love you.
I love you guys too so much. And the first time I heard about Kirkus was in 2006 or something. I was in Decatur, or 2008, I don't remember, but I was in Decatur and I was trying to get a girl's phone number and I was chatting her up. And finally she told me that she worked at Kirkus. And so I was like, aha. But of course I went in and she wasn't there. I'm such a creep sometimes. But anyway, and then I just fell in love with Karis. And I was like, oh yeah, this place is magical.
That's actually how we convert people to become readers. We just have, we get our tentacles out in the world. And
I love it. That's
make people love books. Well, I hope everybody stays safe and well, and that we can gather together physically in the future whenever your next books are in the world.
Inshallah. Thank you, ER.
Thank you, Randa.
Thank you.
Thank you, ER.
Thank you, Megha. It's so good to see you.
So good seeing you.
Take care.